This podcast contains explicit content and discussions related to real-life criminal activities, including violence and sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. The host's opinions are personal and are not representative of any individuals or organizations involved in the cases. We strive for accuracy, but if you've missed anything, please let us know. Thank you for listening. What compels a murderer to crisscross the country, leaving a trail of terror? There are a lot of cold cases that go unsolved, especially when there are incidents that seem to be related, but there is no real motive or any solid evidence linking these multiple incidences or cases together. And that is why it is so hard to catch a serial killer who has no clear motive for taking the lives of innocent people, and why many of them go on a much wider rampage before they actually get caught.
This would have been true for today's case as well, if it were not for a 10-year-old child who outsmarted the self-proclaimed coast-to-coast killer by playing dead. Before we get into the case, here's a disclaimer. This episode includes discussions of sensitive topics such as murder, essay of a minor, so please listen with caution.
On December 30th, 1999, in the small town of Del Rio, Texas, two young friends, 13-year-old Kayleen Harris, also known as Katie, and her 10-year-old friend, Krystal Surles, was getting ready for a sleepover.
Krystal Surles and her younger sister Mark were staying over at the Harrises waiting for their family who were moving from Kansas to Del Rio to start a new chapter. Due to her parents' struggle with drugs, Krystal had a pretty rocky childhood. Krystal, the oldest of the three sisters, had to grow up quickly to take care of her siblings. Pam, their mom, decided to turn her life around by getting clean, starting fresh, and moving to Texas with the kids. It was a bold move, a chance for a new beginning filled with hope and possibilities.
Katie was 13, pretty, and well liked by everybody at school. Krystal and Katie, being the closest in age, quickly grew a liking to each other. Krystal found a great friend in Katie, and their bond was strong. And they were really close, and Krystal was fiercely protective of their friendship because of the special connection that they had. It meant a lot to her. At the sleepover, both the girls wanted to stay up late and talk about the plans for the party they were hosting the next day. They had a bunk bed in Katie's room and kicked 7-year-old Mark out of the room because they just wanted to talk about some big girl stuff. Krystal took the upper bunk and Katie the lower.
The Harris family consisted of mother Krystal Harris, siblings Sean, Justin, Lori, and Katie. The children's father was away on a business trip and wouldn't be back until a few days. That night, Krystal Harris tucked her son Justin in and went to bed. I'm pretty sure quite exhausted from being the only adult in a house full of energetic kids. Krystal and Katie had gone to bed late as recalled by the former, staying up to plan things for the next day's New Year's Eve party.
The night was calm, a soft serenity, until the silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream around 3:50 in the morning. Krystal jerked awake, and the first thing she noticed was the lights on. Confused and disoriented, she popped her head out of the top bunk, desperately searching to find the source of the scream. And that was when she saw Katie, covered in blood, and behind her, a man she would never forget. He was scary and had long, dark, scruffy hair and a bushy beard all over his face, and that made him look unkempt and disheveled. The empty, soulless, and dark eyes of the man were what freaked out Krystal even more. The man held a butcher's knife to Katie's neck, his hand covering her mouth. Krystal watched in pure horror as the man slit Katie's throat with the knife, and Katie fell to the floor with a horrible sound.
The man then proceeded to stab Katie 16 times before he was content with his gruesome act. He watched as Katie bled out and a few seconds later got up to leave. The man had not noticed Krystal on the top bunk, but just as he was about to switch off the light and leave the room, he turned back one more time and saw Krystal's terrified eyes peering down at him. Alarmed at being noticed by the man, Krystal quickly tried to scoot away, but there was no escaping him. He was already over by the bed and reached for Krystal, slitting her throat. Krystal was left laying in her own blood. The man, thinking she was dead, turned and left the room. He let himself out and disappeared into the dark of the night.
As soon as there was no sight of the man, Krystal got up, still worried that the man was close by, climbed down somehow from the top bunk, and immediately went to check on Katie. Katie was choking and gasping, and Krystal tried her best to help her. Krystal knew that she had to go and get help. She staggered down the hall to find her sister, who was sleeping in another room, but she was unable to wake her since she couldn't speak. Panic set in as she thought the man might have killed everyone else too, and she ran out of the house.
It was 5:30 a.m. when Texas Ranger Johnny Allen received a phone call. When he reached the trailer and walked through the halls to the bedroom where the gruesome incident had taken place, he found a young girl lifeless on the floor and blood everywhere. The victim was identified as Katie Harris, but there was no sign of Krystal Surles.
As soon as Krystal got outside, she saw a light in the far distance and she ran desperately towards it. She quickly made her way onto the road and walked a quarter mile toward the light, and only one thought was running through her head, that she had to go get help for Katie. As soon as she reached the house, she started banging on the door frantically. Suddenly, from inside the house, she heard a man was inquiring who it was. Krystal tried to talk, but no sound came from her mouth. She had no choice but to keep banging on the door. When the man finally opened the door, he saw a young girl drenched in her own blood, holding onto her neck. Alarmed, he immediately let her in, and while his wife was tending to her wounds, he called the authorities.
When she was asked what had happened, Krystal signaled for something to write on, and the man straight away got her a pad of paper. With a shaking hand, she wrote, "The Harrises are hurt. Tell them to hurry. My neck needs help. Will I live?" It was absolutely devastating to watch a 10-year-old write on a piece of paper blotted with her blood and unsure if she was going to live or not. Honestly, the amount of courage she had to go through all of this is just amazing. While Katie's body was being discovered, Krystal was rushed to the hospital. Around 6 a.m. that morning, Krystal's mother, Pam Surles, had been notified of the violent attack on her daughter and her friend losing her life. By the time Pam arrived in Texas, Krystal was in recovery. She was barely able to recognize her daughter because of all the tubes and the machines she was hooked up to. It was then she came to know the knife had cut the outer covering of a major artery, which carries blood to the brain, and had sliced Krystal's larynx. It was literally a miracle that the artery itself was unscathed, and her vocal cords had been nicked, which explained her inability to speak. It was absolutely heartbreaking for Pam to watch her daughter ask for her friend, and she couldn't find the words to break the sad news to her. Later in an interview, Krystal recounts to the reporters that Katie's soul had helped her and stayed with her throughout her fight to survive. Krystal was ready to identify her attacker and her best friend's killer. Even though she was weak from the surgery, she wanted to provide information to the authorities as soon as possible so that they could catch her friend's killer.
When Johnny Allen walked into the hospital room Krystal was in, he found her surrounded by tubes, sitting up and desperate to give her statement. He assured Krystal that he was going to catch the man that had done this to her, and at that point in time, he was hoping that he could back that up. Krystal recounted everything that had happened at the trailer and described the physical appearance of the man in great detail, which helped forensic sketch artists to put it into a drawing and develop a sketch of the suspect. Krystal approved the sketch and was quite taken aback at how accurate it was. The authorities then compared the sketch with their database to find any matching suspects or previous offenders. Soon after, they came up with a photo lineup and asked Krystal to point to the man that she had seen in the trailer.
Without missing a beat, she immediately pointed to the man. The man she pointed out was Tommy Lynn Sells, a 35-year-old man living just a few blocks from the Harrises in Del Rio. The most shocking part was that he wasn't a stranger to the family. He knew the Harrises, meeting them for the first time at a local church, and had been inside the trailer a total of 3 times before. Tommy and Terry, Katie's father, had developed a friendship of sorts after he had sold a car to the father at the dealership he worked at. Tommy would come over to the house and talk about problems he had in his life, marital problems, work, and so on. He had met the Harrises' 4 children before. and the family Rottweiler had taken a liking to him. And to think that he was secretly plotting picking his next victim is just sickening.
Mother Krystal Harris had never really taken a liking to the guy. Overall, he had such an unkempt and disheveled appearance. His history of being in and out of prison and alcohol abuse did not help his case. Something about him just felt off to Krystal. Even Katie had noticed that something was off. She had told her mother that she had felt quite weird, Surles looking at her creepily, and she felt uncomfortable around him. He's trying to insert himself into her environment to make it seem ordinary to whatever he was going to do. It is quite common among these type of predators or somebody who has an ulterior motive to try to make themselves part of your environment and trying to integrate themselves as a part of your life, trying to gain some trust with you and the people around you, so it won't seem very weird when they're actually there with another motive in mind. Upon hearing these accounts, the detectives felt even more certain that they had their guy. It is safe to speculate that Surles entered the trailer on December 31st with Katie as the target in his mind, which explains why he didn't go after the rest of the family. Krystal just had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. By January 2nd, 2000, the authorities reached the house of Tommy Surles, where he had been staying with his wife and kids.
It is honestly so repulsive that this horrible man was living in the same house along with his own kids after casually murdering another father's child without the slightest remorse.
The authorities had a warrant for his arrest and at 6 a.m. that day surrounded his house. They found the door slightly open, so they let themselves in and came face to face with Tommy, who had been expecting them. He smiled and told them that he was glad that he was finally caught and that he was getting tired of doing this. This guy is just so freaking disgusting. Like, the lack of remorse and the absolute arrogance is just ironic. Also, like you said, this guy had a wife and kids and he just lived this double life. I think there are a lot of serial killers who actually have a normal life on the side of having a very shady life also, right? But this guy is different actually. He does not have a moral code. His targets include anybody and everybody. Everybody is fair game to Tommy Surles.
Upon further investigation, the detectives found bloody clothes in his house that were later proved to have both Katie's and Krystal's DNA on them. They also found the murder weapon he had hidden behind his house outside in the bushes, which was irrefutable evidence for an open and shut case. He also walked the police through the crime scene and detailed how he had done everything. While on their way to the precinct, Tommy said something that sent a chill down their spines. I guess you want to know about the other murders as well. Let us go back into Tommy's world. Tommy was born in California in 1964 and, like most serial killers, had a not so normal childhood. His problems in life started when he was just 18 months old, when he and his twin sister, Tammy Jean, were diagnosed with spinal meningitis. Now, if you don't know what meningitis is, it is a condition which affects the spine and the brain. Tommy made it through while his sister passed away. By the age of 7, he was an alcohol addict, which he used to steal from his grandfather's stash. A year later, Tommy began socializing with a man named Willis Clark, who Tommy alleged was molesting him. His mother's lack of action traumatized him greatly and possibly was a contributing factor to his later years of criminal activities. Tommy later added that he would relive these experiences while committing crimes. At the age of 10, he started doing drugs.
He later then tried to recreate his experiences of molestation on his own grandmother and his mother, which resulted in him being kicked out of the house to fend for himself at just 14 years old. The feeling of abandonment and isolation drove him into a fit of rage in which he shot and assaulted a woman who later survived. So, Tommy began living life as a nomad, moving from place to place at the age of 14. He then failed to receive mental help and his drinking worsened, leading to his first arrest in 1982 for being publicly drunk. Tommy hitchhiked across the United States between 1978 to 1999, committing several crimes along the way. He held short-term manual labor and barber jobs. Because of his repeated substance abuse, he was imprisoned several times. His first murder was at the age of 15 in Mississippi. After breaking into a house and claiming to see a man molesting a young boy, triggered a fit of rage, resulting in him murdering the man man, though this had not been confirmed. In his own words, once he pulled the trigger, he just felt a rush, like a shot of dope. And once he had gotten a taste for murder, he couldn't stop. That feeling was exhilarating.
At first, he only targeted marginalized victims, but a few years later into his spree, he got bolder and targeted non-marginalized communities. He was arrested multiple times, and most of them were mainly for theft, like stealing cars. He traveled from state to state looking for his next spree, and hence was called the cross-country killer, aka the coast-to-coast killer. He was a drifter who went around the country avoiding any police suspicion, and that's probably the reason he was able to get away with committing so many heinous crimes for a long time. One of the first victims to ever live to tell the story is Fabian Witherspoon. After being released from prison, Tommy decided to up his game by finding his victims through more creative ways. He posed as a beggar with a sign that read, "Will work for food." Fabian, while going to her friend's house, saw him on the streets begging and felt sorry for him and went up to him. He gained her sympathy by telling a made-up life story, and she led him to her friend's house and asked him to wait outside while she went and got some supplies for him. As soon as she had gone inside, he quietly followed her inside, shut the door, grabbed a kitchen knife, and threatened to kill her if she did not do what he had told her. At first, scared for her life, Fabian complied and slowly went into the bathroom as he had directed her, and when she realized his true intentions, she started to fight. Grabbing a ceramic duck which was sitting on the toilet, she started hitting him repeatedly on the head till only the beak was left in her hands. But the man was still standing. Letting his guard down, he placed the knife down on the counter. She grabbed the knife and stabbed him repeatedly, desperate to escape him. As soon as he went down, she dropped the knife and ran out of the bathroom. Just when she thought she had escaped, he grabbed her by the back of the hair, dragged her back into the bathroom, and hit her on the head with a piano stool. In the struggle, he had also given her a hand laceration which later required surgery. Leaving her there, he bolted out the door. Luckily for her, she was able to quickly call the authorities, and thus she became one of his only 2 victims to survive. Tommy, however, had been badly injured and had to get himself into a hospital, where the police then picked him up, and he accepted the plea bargain on malicious wounding charges, which got him 5 years in prison. The crazy thing is that just after 5 years, he would be roaming around and killing so many more.
After getting out of prison in just 4 months, he was back at it again, this time in Lawrenceville, Illinois. He was at a convenience store when he felt triggered by another shopper he felt was being rude to him. This person was Julie Ray Harper. And at the time, whether she knew it or not, she had pissed off a serial killer by mistake. Tommy, consumed with his need for revenge, followed her home, grabbed a kitchen knife, and went into the bedroom of Julie's 10-year-old son, Joel Kirkpatrick, and attacked him in his sleep. Her son's blood-curdling screams woke Julie up, and she ran to his room. And to her horror, there stood a tall man over her son's bloody body. He lunged at her, but she was able to fight him off until she tripped over something, and then he knocked her out. When she finally came to, she rushed outside to call for help, but it was too late for little Joel. He had not survived. Things take a horrible turn when Julie is arrested for her son's murder. From the struggle with Tommy, she had gotten some of her son's blood on her. There were no signs of forced entry, and the police connecting these points weren't ready to believe her. The prosecution presented her motive as the ongoing custody battle for Joel. She was later charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to 65 years in prison for the murder, a crime she had not committed, while Tommy walked away scot-free.
On April 8, 1999, during a street fair in San Antonio, Texas, Tommy kidnapped a 9-year-old girl named Mary Beatrice Perez, shoved her into his car, and drove a few miles to a secluded spot where then he proceeded to essay her and strangled her to death with her own t-shirt. Her body was discovered in a nearby creek 10 days later.
These are just a few of the murders that Surles confessed to after his arrest in 2000. Overall, he confessed to a total of 22 murders. Most of these murders are not confirmed. On September 12, 2000, the trial against Tommy Lynn Surles began. He pleaded not guilty to the murder of Katie Harris, but pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of Krystal Surles. This then meant that Krystal had to face her attacker again in court. The brave young girl came to court and gave a full witness testimony, which then made things difficult for Tommy's defense team. Even though Tommy's defense team tried to get him off death row, saying that it wasn't a capital offense, Tommy had dug his own grave when he admitted to sexually assaulting Katie before killing her, and in the state of Texas, rape compounded with murder is a death sentence. The jurors, after discussing for some time, declared him guilty of capital murder.
In 2001, he was convicted for the murder of Mary Beatrice Perez, which earned him another life sentence on top of the death penalty he was already facing. During his time in prison, he confessed to the murder of Joelle Kirkpatrick, which then got Julie Ray Harper a chance at retrial. This time, she was prepared to fight and got a new defense team for herself from the Center on Wrongful Convictions. She was found not guilty and exonerated, but Tommy was never charged with Joelle's death. The only crimes he was convicted of were the murders of Mary Beatrice Perez and Katie Harris and the attempted murder of Krystal Surles. On 3rd April 2014, at the age of 49, he was given his last meal, and when he was asked if he had any final words, he said no. After that, he was injected with a lethal dose of a sedative which put him to sleep, and 13 minutes later, he passed away. Standing a few feet away was Krystal Surles and members of the Harris family bearing witness.
If it hadn't been for Krystal, who knows if Tommy would have ever been caught. Her courageous actions helped bring justice to at least some of the victims. And that is the story of Krystal Surles. When it comes to Tommy, he is different from other serial killers because he didn't form a pattern as most, and people don't matter. It is a sensation of blood and the feeling of the high. And this is his own words. He killed virtually anyone, men, women, children, with many of his victims being young, helpless children. His methods varied. Sometimes he used a knife and other times a gun. He didn't like guns. He said they were too dangerous. All while enjoying seeing a knife slash across the skin and blood gushing out. When asked if he was playing God, he said, "Tommy is not a god. Tommy is a very complex, screwed up individual." I mean, he's right about that part.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone, in his opinion, said that Tommy Lynn Surles is more disturbing and callous than Ted Bundy or Gary Ridgway, and that he is the most cold-blooded killer. On a scale of ranking psychopath, Tommy received a score of 22, marking his callous and fearless sadistic nature, ranking higher than Ted Bundy and other serial killers. According to the University of Southern California researcher Michelle Fung, psychopaths don't have the same experience of fear or anxiety that most normal people do. Most of us fear the consequences of telling a lie, hurting someone, or shoplifting, but to them, it doesn't bother them as much, or maybe even a little.
Do you think that psychopaths can be reformed? Like, can they reintegrate back into society and live like any other normal person would do? What do you think?
I mean, in my personal opinion, I do not think that psychopaths can be reformed, because then they return on their killing spree and possibly hurt more people. Again, this is just my personal opinion.
I think so too as well. According to multiple studies that have been done, and I just recently watched a documentary with Dr. Stone in it. They were investigating the brains of psychopaths, and it seemed that the area in the brain that helps people feel emotions, it is differently developed for psychopaths. And if it is something in the brain to do with biology, I don't think that you can really reform them per se. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next episode. I'm Kay.
And I'm V.
And we'll see you all in the next episode.